Most men don't realize the game changed while they were busy trying to improve themselves the old way. They were taught to be nicer, more attentive, more emotionally available, more responsive, and on paper, that should have worked. But it didn't, because the environment shifted. Today, women don't live in a world of scarcity. They live in a world of overflow. Messages never stop. Attention is constant. Validation is one tap away. And in a world where options are endless, being good is invisible. Being available is forgettable. Being eager is cheap. Standing out used to mean having more status, more money, more confidence. But now, everyone is posturing. Everyone is performing. Everyone is trying to look like the highlight reel version of themselves. So the man who thinks he'll win by competing harder is already behind, because abundance doesn't make people choose faster, it makes them numb. When attention is everywhere, it loses value, and the more a man tries to prove himself in that environment, the more he blends into the noise. This is why so many men feel replaceable, even when they're doing everything right. They show up consistently, they text back quickly, they listen, they reassure, and yet the woman still drifts, not because he lacked value, but because his presence carried no weight. In a world where women have endless options, what stands out isn't intensity, it's gravity. And gravity doesn't chase, gravity pulls. Endless options don't create clarity, they create anxiety. Choice overload doesn't make women happier, it makes them restless. Every new option introduces doubt about the previous one. Every new message reopens the question of could there be better, and the man who tries to lock her down with effort or persuasion only amplifies that doubt because he signals that he's afraid of being replaced. And fear, no matter how well disguised, is not attractive in a market where replacement is easy. The men who stand out understand something uncomfortable. You cannot compete with infinite options by offering more. You compete by offering less access, less emotional availability, less predictability, less neediness. Not as a tactic, but as a byproduct of having a full life that doesn't revolve around being chosen. Because the only thing rarer than attention today is a man who doesn't desperately seek it. Women are flooded with men trying to be impressive. Compliments blur together, promises lose meaning, even affection starts to feel transactional. So when a man enters her life who is calm, selective and grounded, who doesn't rush to define things, doesn't panic when she pulls back, doesn't overreact to silence, he creates contrast. Not because he's mysterious in a gimmicky way, but because he's not desperate to be included in her chaos. This is where most men self-sabotage. They sense competition and respond by accelerating, texting more, giving more, explaining more, offering more reassurance. But acceleration only works when the other person is uncertain. In a world of endless options, acceleration looks like pressure, and pressure triggers resistance. The man who stands out slows the pace. He doesn't mirror her urgency, he sets his own rhythm, and lets her decide if she can keep up. Standing out is less about what you do, and more about what you don't tolerate. A man with standards instantly separates himself from the crowd. Not loud standards, not performative boundaries, quiet ones. He notices patterns. He watches behavior under stress. He doesn't argue his worth. He doesn't audition. And because he's willing to walk away from inconsistency, his presence feels earned, not assumed. Endless options train women to expect constant stimulation, new conversations, new excitement, new emotional spikes. But stimulation burns out quickly. What doesn't burn out is stability with depth. And paradoxically, stability only feels attractive when it isn't trying to convince anyone. The man who stands out isn't trying to keep her entertained, he's seeing if she adds peace or friction to his life. That reversal alone shifts the entire dynamic. In a marketplace flooded with men trying to be chosen, the rarest thing is a man who already chose his life, his purpose, his direction, his standards. He isn't impressed by attention because he's not starving for it. He isn't shaken by options because he knows most options are noise. And when a woman senses that, when she realizes she's not the center of his universe, but a potential addition to something already solid, that's when she slows down. That's when she starts paying attention. Not because she has endless options, but because he doesn't need one. Most men misunderstand what endless options actually do to a woman's psychology. They assume it gives her power, certainty, and leverage. In reality, it gives her noise. It fragments attention. It shortens emotional patience. It creates a constant low-level dissatisfaction because the mind is always half occupied with what might be better. So when a man enters her life trying to compete inside that noise, he becomes just another voice. But when he doesn't compete at all, when he isn't reactive to the environment she's drowning in, he becomes noticeable simply by contrast. The man who stands out understands that attraction and abundance is not built through pursuit, but through positioning. He positions himself as someone who is already moving somewhere meaningful. He isn't asking for permission to exist in her life. He's not negotiating his value. He's not adjusting his boundaries to fit her moods. And because he's anchored in something beyond her validation, his presence doesn't feel temporary. It feels solid. It feels rare. It feels like something that doesn't need to be tested every 5 minutes. This is where emotional restraint becomes misunderstood. It's not coldness. It's not indifference. It's self-regulation. A man who doesn't emotionally spike every time she gives or withholds attention communicates something powerful without words. I'm not governed by your reactions. In a world where most men are emotionally programmable, rewarded by attention, punished by silence, that autonomy is magnetic. Not because it's manipulative, but because it's grounded. Endless options also warp how women evaluate men. When choices are limited, depth matters. When choices are infinite, novelty takes over. And novelty is shallow by nature, so the man who keeps trying to stand out with bigger gestures, sharper lines, or louder personality traits is unknowingly playing a short-term game. He might spike interest, but he won't anchor it. The man who stands out long-term is the one whose presence remains steady, even when novelty fades. This is why the most effective men don't over-explain themselves. They don't justify their decisions. They don't write essays when there's tension. They understand that explanation is often an attempt to control perception, and perception in a world of endless options is unstable. Instead, they let behavior speak. They let consistency do the talking. And consistency, when paired with boundaries, does something explanation never can. It builds trust without asking for it. There's a moment every woman with endless options eventually reaches, usually quietly, where all the conversations start sounding the same, the compliments blur, the interest feels repetitive, and the emotional highs lose their punch. That's when a man who isn't chasing attention starts to stand out. Not because he's louder, but because he's still there, unchanged, unbothered, unmoved by the volatility of the dating marketplace. Men who stand out don't fight for attention, they filter for alignment. They don't ask, how do I keep her interested? They ask, does this connection add clarity or chaos to my life? That internal shift is subtle but massive. Because once a man stops orienting his behavior around being selected, he becomes selective. And selectivity, real selectivity, not arrogance, is extremely rare in men who haven't been burned enough to develop it. Endless options also make women hypersensitive to weakness, not in character but in frame. A man who constantly checks her temperature, seeks reassurance, or adjusts himself to maintain access reveals that her approval outranks his self-respect. And in a world where approval is cheap, that revelation instantly lowers his perceived value. The man who stands out doesn't need constant feedback to stay centered. He's comfortable with ambiguity. He allows space, and space is what forces attraction to breathe. This doesn't mean disappearing or playing games. It means being whole, whether she's present or not. When a woman senses that a man's life doesn't pause when she steps back, it creates tension, not anxiety, but curiosity. She wonders where his energy goes, what occupies his mind, what he's building, and for the first time, she's not being pulled by stimulation, she's being pulled by substance. In a world where women can replace a man in minutes, the man who stands out is the one who cannot replace himself, not because he's superior, but because he's singular. His routines, his values, his direction, his standards, none of it bends to the dating climate. And when a woman realizes she's dealing with someone who won't contort himself to fit into her endless options, she has to make a choice. Not between men, but between depth and distraction. What most men fail to grasp is that standing out has nothing to do with being unforgettable in the moment, and everything to do with being irreplaceable over time. Endless options reward novelty, but punish depth, and the man who keeps trying to impress becomes another fleeting experience, memorable for a moment, forgotten just as quickly. The man who stands out doesn't try to dominate her attention, he allows absence to do its work. Not as manipulation, but as a natural consequence of having a life that doesn't orbit her availability. Endless choice trains women to constantly reassess their decisions. Even when things are good, the background question lingers, is this the best I can do? And that question poisons connection when a man's entire posture is built around pleasing, because pleasing suggests insecurity. It suggests that his value depends on her staying. The man who stands out removes that pressure, not by withdrawing affection, but by refusing to beg for permanence in a world that doesn't respect it. This is why grounded men don't rush emotional intimacy. They let it unfold naturally, without forcing labels, without accelerating milestones to secure position. They understand that in an environment of endless options, speed doesn't signal confidence, it signals fear of competition. So they slow down, they let her wander, they let silence exist, and in that space, attraction either deepens or dissolves. But either outcome serves the man who knows his direction. There's a quiet authority that emerges when a man doesn't react to fluctuation. When she's warm, he's present. When she's distant, he remains composed. He doesn't interrogate shifts in energy. He doesn't chase emotional clarity. He observes, and that observation does something unsettling to someone used to controlling outcomes through attention. It removes leverage, because you can't destabilize a man who isn't dependent on your validation to feel whole. Women with endless options are constantly being emotionally catered to. Men bend themselves into agreeable shapes to stay in her orbit. Over time, that creates entitlement, not consciously but structurally. So when she encounters a man who doesn't bend, doesn't over-accommodate, and doesn't renegotiate his values to maintain access, it interrupts the pattern. His resistance isn't aggressive, it's quiet, and quiet resistance carries more weight than loud dominance ever could. This is where most men misinterpret being yourself. They think authenticity means emotional transparency at all times. But emotional discipline is not dishonesty, it's maturity. The man who stands out doesn't dump his inner world into her lap to create intimacy. He reveals selectively. He speaks when there's something worth saying, and because his words aren't constant, they land heavier. Scarcity applies to communication as much as it does to attention. Endless options also distort how conflict is handled. Women accustomed to replacing men quickly have little incentive to work through discomfort. Friction becomes a signal to exit rather than an opportunity to grow. The man who stands out doesn't beg for resolution. He doesn't fear disagreement. He states his position calmly and accepts the consequences, whatever they may be. That willingness to lose the connection rather than lose himself reframes the entire interaction. There's a misconception that standing out requires dominance or aloofness. It doesn't. It requires self-sufficiency. A man who is emotionally self-sustaining doesn't drain her with need, doesn't overwhelm her with expectations, and doesn't suffocate the connection with constant reassurance seeking. Instead, he invites her into a life that's already full. An invitation is far more powerful than pursuit in a world where pursuit is everywhere. When a woman realizes that a man is not trying to extract something from her, attention, validation, certainty, she relaxes. Not because she feels in control, but because she senses he's not operating from lack, and lack is what makes most men interchangeable. The man who stands out is the one whose presence feels optional but valuable, not required, not demanded, not negotiated, chosen. In the end, endless options don't eliminate desire, they expose it. They reveal who is seeking stimulation and who is seeking grounding. The man who stands out doesn't chase desire, he contains it. He becomes the place where chaos slows down, where emotional noise quiets, where choices feel heavier because they actually matter. And that's the paradox. In a world where women can have almost anything, the man who stands out is the one who offers something rare, a reality worth choosing over distraction. What separates the men who fade from the men who linger in her mind isn't charm or looks, it's emotional footprint. Most men leave none. They come in loud, overexposed, emotionally eager, and disappear without residue. The man who stands out doesn't flood her nervous system. He doesn't overwhelm her with access. He allows space for her to feel his absence, and absence, when it's earned, creates reflection. Reflection is where attachment actually forms, not in constant presence. Endless options condition women to expect instant gratification, not emotional digestion. Conversations are disposable. Connections are interchangeable, but the man who stands out forces digestion by not being instantly consumable. He doesn't reveal everything at once. He doesn't compress intimacy into early-stage bonding. And because he doesn't rush the emotional arc, his presence takes time to process, and anything that takes time immediately separates itself from the disposable. This is why men who are always available rarely feel valuable. Availability without discernment signals that access to you has no cost. And when access has no cost, it has no gravity. The man who stands out doesn't weaponize distance, but he respects it. He understands that familiarity without respect breeds complacency, and complacency kills attraction faster than conflict ever could. There's also a quiet confidence in men who don't need to constantly clarify where they stand. They don't ask for reassurance. They don't chase labels prematurely. They don't seek verbal confirmation of interest to calm their anxiety. They let actions reveal alignment over time. In a world addicted to instant certainty, patience becomes a form of dominance, not over her, but over oneself. Women with endless options are used to men performing emotional labor up front to secure position. Over time, that performance becomes expected. So when a man refuses to perform, when he remains consistent without over-investing, it creates a tension she's not used to. She doesn't know whether to lean in or pull back because the usual levers don't work. And that uncertainty, when paired with emotional safety, creates intrigue rather than fear. The man who stands out also understands that attraction is not built through persuasion. You don't talk someone into desire. You don't logic them into consistency. You don't argue your way into being valued. You embody value by how you live, what you tolerate, and what you walk away from. An embodiment is something endless options can't dilute because it's rare and it's felt rather than evaluated. Another truth most men avoid is that endless options make women hyper-aware of male insecurity. They can feel when a man is measuring himself against others. They sense comparison before it's spoken, and comparison kills polarity. The man who stands out isn't scanning the room for rivals. He's focused forward. His energy isn't defensive, it's directed, and direction is deeply attractive in a world flooded with men trying to adjust themselves to be chosen. Men who stand out also don't mistake emotional volatility for passion. They don't chase highs and lows, thinking intensity equals connection. They understand that chaos creates attachment through instability, not respect. So they don't reward erratic behavior. They don't amplify drama. They respond calmly, or not at all. And by doing so, they unconsciously train the dynamic toward peace, rather than stimulation. Endless options create a culture where being easily replaced becomes normal. That reality terrifies men who haven't built an internal anchor, so they cling, they overfunction, they sacrifice leverage for proximity. The man who stands out accepts replaceability without fear, because his identity isn't tied to being selected. And when a man is no longer afraid of replacement, he paradoxically becomes much harder to replace. Standing out then isn't about trying to be unforgettable, it's about being unshakable. A man who doesn't change himself to match the emotional weather, who doesn't abandon his rhythm to accommodate uncertainty, who doesn't bargain with his self-respect to secure attention, that man becomes a reference point. And in a world where women are drowning in options but starving for grounding, the man who becomes a reference point becomes the one who lingers long after the noise fades. One of the most misunderstood ideas in modern dating is that men must constantly add value to keep a woman interested. More effort, more communication, more emotional output. But in a world where women already have endless options, adding more often does the opposite. It dilutes impact. The man who stands out understands subtraction. He removes noise. He removes overexposure. He removes the need to constantly assert presence. And what remains carries weight because it isn't cluttered by desperation. Endless options also train women to subconsciously test men, not because they enjoy chaos, but because abundance removes certainty. When everything is replaceable, nothing feels solid until it resists pressure. So she probes, she withdraws, she shifts tone, not always intentionally, and the man who stands out doesn't panic when this happens. He doesn't chase clarity, he doesn't scramble to re-secure position. He stays where he is, and that steadiness answers the test without ever acknowledging it. This is where emotional discipline separates men. Most men interpret withdrawal as a problem to solve. The grounded man sees it as information. He observes whether she returns naturally or whether distance exposes disinterest, and he doesn't fear the outcome, because his sense of self isn't built on maintaining access to someone who is undecided. In a world of endless options, that calm willingness to lose becomes a powerful filter. The man who stands out also doesn't confuse effort with value. He knows that effort is only meaningful when it's chosen, not when it's required to keep someone engaged. So he doesn't overgive early. He doesn't overinvest before alignment is proven. He lets reciprocity reveal itself. And reciprocity, when it emerges naturally, carries far more significance than anything forced by fear of competition. Women with endless options are rarely denied attention, but they are often denied standards. Men bend so quickly that boundaries become theoretical. So when a man enforces standards quietly, by disengaging rather than arguing, it creates a psychological shift. For the first time, access feels conditional. Not because he's controlling, but because he respects himself enough to require consistency. And consistency is the one thing endless options cannot fake. This is why the men who stand out rarely explain why they pull back. They don't announce boundaries, they don't threaten, they simply act in alignment with what they tolerate, and that silence is louder than confrontation. It communicates that he trusts his judgment enough not to justify it, and trust in one's own judgment is one of the strongest signals of masculine grounding there is. Endless options also inflate emotional entitlement. When attention is constant, it begins to feel deserved. So when a man doesn't respond immediately, doesn't escalate on cue, or doesn't mirror intensity, it disrupts expectation. Not because he's withholding, but because he's operating on his own internal clock. And that autonomy forces a recalibration. She has to decide whether to adapt to his rhythm or move on. The man who stands out is comfortable letting that decision happen without interference. He doesn't campaign for relevance. He doesn't flood the gap with reassurance. He lets silence do what words never could: reveal priorities. In a world where communication is endless but meaning is scarce, silence becomes diagnostic. It shows who values presence versus who merely enjoys access. Another reason most men fail to stand out is because they confuse emotional availability with emotional accessibility. Being available means reacting whenever she reaches out. Being accessible means offering connection when alignment exists. The man who stands out is accessible, not available. His attention isn't automatic, it's intentional, and intentional attention feels far more valuable than constant attention ever will. Ultimately, standing out in a world of endless options means refusing to live as an option yourself. It means building a life that doesn't shrink to accommodate indecision. It means understanding that attraction is not something you maintain through effort, but something you allow to grow through grounding. And when a woman encounters a man who is rooted, who doesn't chase, doesn't panic, doesn't perform, she feels it immediately. Not as excitement, not as fantasy, but as something far rarer in her world: stability with edge. Most men don't realize how foreign stability feels in an environment dominated by excess choice. When everything is available, nothing feels anchored. So when a woman encounters a man whose emotional state doesn't rise and fall with her attention, it creates a subtle friction. Not discomfort, but awareness. She senses that his center exists independent of her reactions, and independence of center is what separates a man from the endless stream of men trying to plug emotional gaps they don't even understand. Endless options condition women to associate excitement with unpredictability, sudden shifts, emotional spikes, the rush of novelty. But novelty always expires. The man who stands out doesn't compete in volatility. He offers depth that doesn't announce itself immediately. And because depth requires time to be felt, it bypasses the part of the mind addicted to stimulation and speaks directly to the part that craves safety, even if she isn't consciously aware of it yet. This is why grounded men don't chase emotional reassurance after moments of connection. They don't text endlessly after a good date to preserve momentum. They don't attempt to lock in interest through follow-up performance. They let the experience breathe, and that restraint signals something powerful: that the moment was valuable, but not scarce enough to be clung to. In a culture where everything is grasped at, non-attachment stands out. Women with endless options are used to men trying to stay top of mind. Messages, check-ins, emotional bids. But being top of mind doesn't create respect, it creates saturation. The man who stands out allows himself to fade temporarily without fear, because he trusts that what he offers isn't forgettable. And trust in one's own imprint is something most men never develop. There's also a difference between confidence and certainty that most people overlook. Confidence is self-belief. Certainty is self-trust. The man who stands out operates from certainty. He doesn't need to convince himself he's valuable. His decisions reflect it. He doesn't need affirmation to continue moving forward. And in a world where validation is abundant, but grounding is rare, certainty becomes unmistakable. Endless options also amplify emotional testing, not because women enjoy games, but because abundance removes risk. So they push boundaries without consciously realizing it. They cancel, they delay, they deprioritize. And the man who stands out doesn't retaliate. He doesn't explain. He simply adjusts access. He responds proportionally. And proportional response communicates maturity far more effectively than confrontation ever could. This is where men who lack internal structure unravel. They interpret inconsistency as a challenge to overcome, rather than information to evaluate. So they invest more, they give more chances, they abandon standards for the promise of potential. The man who stands out sees inconsistency as a signal, not an obstacle, and because he doesn't personalize it, he remains calm while others spiral. Women with endless options are rarely forced to reflect because replacement is easy, so reflection only happens when something resists replacement. When a man doesn't chase, doesn't return after disrespect, and doesn't re-enter dynamics that drained him, it creates a pause, and in that pause, comparison shifts. Suddenly, not all options feel equal, because most options bend, few remain intact. The man who stands out also understands that attraction isn't maintained by proximity. It's maintained by polarity, and polarity disappears when a man becomes reactive, so he stays anchored. He doesn't mirror emotional swings, he doesn't allow her uncertainty to become his instability, and that containment creates safety, even if it initially feels unfamiliar to someone used to chaos. In a world where women can swipe, scroll, and replace endlessly, the man who stands out isn't louder, faster, or more impressive. He's solid. His presence doesn't ask to be chosen, it invites consideration. And when a woman encounters a man whose life continues forward, regardless of her indecision, she feels something she can't quite name. Not excitement, not fantasy, but weight. And weight in a weightless world is unforgettable. One of the quiet truths about standing out is that it requires a man to be comfortable being misunderstood. In a world where women have endless options, clarity is often mistaken for arrogance and boundaries are mislabeled as indifference. The man who stands out doesn't rush to correct these misinterpretations. He understands that explanation is often an attempt to control perception, and perception in an environment of abundance is unstable anyway, so he lets misunderstanding exist, trusting that alignment will reveal itself without force. Endless options also distort how effort is interpreted. When effort is everywhere, it stops being impressive. Grand gestures lose meaning. Emotional intensity feels performative. The man who stands out isn't trying to prove devotion early. He knows that early devotion without discernment reads as insecurity. So he allows investment to unfold slowly, in proportion to consistency, and proportional investment feels safe in a world where excess often hides lack. This is why grounded men don't compete for attention. They let attention come to them naturally, not because they expect it, but because their life creates pull. They're engaged in work, purpose, growth, things that don't pause for validation. And when a woman senses that a man's focus isn't split between her and the fear of losing her, his presence becomes distinct, not louder, just clearer. Most men are afraid of silence because silence feels like losing ground, but the man who stands out understands silence as neutral territory. He doesn't fill it to maintain relevance. He doesn't assume disinterest. He lets space exist long enough for intention to surface. And in a culture addicted to constant stimulation, the ability to sit comfortably in silence becomes a quiet display of strength. Women with endless options often live in a constant state of emotional comparison. How this feels versus how that felt. Who texts better? Who excites more? And comparison erodes presence. The man who stands out doesn't try to win comparisons. He opts out of them. He doesn't perform against invisible rivals. He remains rooted in who he is. And opting out of comparison is something very few men have the internal security to do. This security shows most clearly during moments of tension. When there's uncertainty, misalignment, or emotional friction, most men escalate. They demand clarity. They seek reassurance. They push for resolution. The man who stands out slows down. He doesn't avoid the issue, but he doesn't chase closure either. He allows time to reveal whether the connection has structure or was sustained by momentum alone. Endless options also make commitment feel abstract. When alternatives are always visible, committing feels like loss rather than choice. The man who stands out doesn't pressure commitment. He understands that forced commitment breeds resentment, so he focuses on building something worth committing to, not by persuasion, but by consistency. And consistency, when maintained without attachment to outcome, becomes compelling. Another truth men rarely accept is that attraction weakens when a man needs a woman to see his value. Needing recognition places power outside the self. The man who stands out doesn't broadcast his worth. He lives it. His standards aren't slogans. They're reflected in what he allows access to his time, energy, and attention, and live standards are far harder to ignore than spoken ones. Women with endless options are often surrounded by men who want something from them. Validation, intimacy, certainty. That constant extraction creates fatigue. So when a man enters her life, who isn't trying to take, who isn't pushing for outcome, who isn't using interaction as a means to fill a void, it shifts the emotional tone. She doesn't feel hunted, she feels met. Standing out in the end is about becoming a man whose presence doesn't demand anything. A man who isn't seeking completion, approval, or reassurance. In a world overflowing with men who want, the man who stands out is the one who chooses. And when a woman senses she's not being chased but evaluated, not judged but observed, she slows down, because for the first time in a world of endless options, she's not the prize, she's the possibility.